She wept in silence, her heart burdened with sorrow. But little did she know, destiny had already woven a miracle into her path, one that would turn her pain into the purest form of love. She wept in silence, her heart burdened with sorrow. But little did she know, destiny had already woven a miracle into her path, one that would turn her pain into the purest form of love. The night was quiet except for the faint rustling of the wind against the worn wooden shutters. Inside the dimly lit room, she sat near the window, gazing at the world beyond with tear-streaked cheeks. Each drop that fell carried a fragment of the pain she had held within for far too long. It wasn't just sadness, it was a weight pressing down on her chest, making every breath feel heavier than the last. She had once dreamed of a life filled with joy, of moments wrapped in warmth and belonging. But life had unraveled differently. The people she had trusted had left, and the love she had held onto so tightly had slipped through her fingers like sand in the wind. Now, all that remained was an aching emptiness, a void that echoed louder in the silence of her lonely nights. The memories were relentless. Every whispered promise, every gentle touch, every fleeting moment of happiness replayed in her mind like an old melody she could no longer sing. She had given her heart without hesitation, believing in the purity of love, only to watch it shatter into pieces she could never quite gather again. She wiped her face with trembling hands, though the tears refused to stop. She had tried to be strong, to hold herself together in front of the world, but in the solitude of her own space, she allowed herself to break. The walls around her had heard her cries more times than she could count, and the moon had witnessed her silent prayers, the ones she whispered with the hope that someone, somewhere, was listening. Her faith wavered, but it never disappeared entirely. Somewhere deep inside, she believed there had to be a reason for her suffering. Perhaps life was testing her resilience, or maybe she was meant to learn something through this pain. But the uncertainty of it all made it harder to endure. She longed for a sign, for a gentle reassurance that her struggle was not in vain. Outside, the night stretched endlessly, mirroring the loneliness she felt within. The world continued as if nothing had changed, as if her sorrow was invisible to those who walked past her without a second glance. How strange it was that one person's world could crumble while the rest remained untouched. The weight of the past clung to her like an unshakable shadow. She had tried to move forward, to silence the voice in her head that whispered reminders of all she had lost. But no matter how far she walked, the echoes of yesterday followed her. They crept into her thoughts in the quietest moments, reminding her of what once was and what would never be again. She sighed, wrapping her arms around herself, seeking warmth where none existed. The walls of the room felt smaller, pressing in on her as if they, too, understood the suffocation of heartbreak. She closed her eyes, wishing, just for a moment, that time could rewind to a place where love still embraced her. But life never worked that way. The past could not be undone, and the future remained an unread story. All she had was the present, the aching, raw reality of the moment. And yet, somewhere in the depths of her despair, there was a whisper, a voice so faint that she barely noticed it at first. It was not the voice of regret or sorrow. It was something different, a quiet strength, buried beneath the pain, urging her to hold on. She opened her eyes, glancing at the sky beyond the window. The stars twinkled, distant yet constant, as if they carried silent messages meant only for those who chose to see them. Maybe her pain wasn't the end of her story. Maybe, just maybe, fate had something more in store for her. But for now, all she could do was wait. Wait for the moment when the weight on her heart would lift. Wait for the day when her tears would no longer be a burden but a reminder of the strength she had found in the darkness. And perhaps, without even realizing it, she had already begun to heal. She sat motionless, her gaze lost in the distance as the night stretched on. The weight of sorrow clung to her like a veil, obscuring any glimmer of hope. Yet, deep within, something stirred, a faint whisper in the quiet, a presence that she could not quite name. She did not yet know it, but fate was already weaving its intricate design, preparing to intervene in ways beyond her understanding. A sudden knock at the door disrupted the stillness. The sound was soft but insistent, pulling her from the depths of her thoughts. For a moment, she hesitated, her heart pounding against her ribs. Visitors were rare, especially at such an hour. Wiping away the remnants of her tears, she slowly stood, uncertain but compelled to answer. As she pulled open the door, the cool night air rushed in, carrying with it a sense of something unfamiliar yet strangely comforting. Standing before her was an old woman, her face lined with wisdom and years of untold stories. Her eyes, though aged, held a warmth that felt almost otherworldly, as if she could see beyond the surface, straight into the heart of sorrow itself. "You've been waiting for something, haven't you?" the woman said, her voice gentle yet firm. She swallowed, unsure how to respond. How could a stranger know of the emptiness she carried? The words settled deep within her, stirring emotions she had tried to suppress. She hesitated, then sighed. "I don't know what I'm waiting for." The woman gave a knowing smile. "Sometimes, we don't have to know. Sometimes, fate moves even when we cannot see its hands." A strange sensation spread through her chest, a mixture of curiosity and an unexplainable sense of relief. It had been so long since anyone had truly seen her, spoken to her with such understanding. She gestured for the woman to step inside, offering her the only comfort she had left, a place to sit and listen. As they settled into the dimly lit room, the old woman studied her surroundings before turning her gaze back to the young woman. "Pain has a way of making us believe we are alone," she said. "But no sorrow exists without purpose, and no heart remains broken forever." The young woman wanted to believe those words, but the wounds within her felt too deep, too lasting. What if this pain never leaves? What if I never find my way back to happiness? The old woman reached into the folds of her shawl and retrieved something small, placing it on the table between them. It was a simple, worn locket. "This once belonged to someone who thought the same," she murmured. "A woman who had lost everything, her family, her love, even her will to go on. She carried grief like a chain, believing she would never be free from its weight." She studied the locket, its surface scratched and aged, yet still holding on to its form, much like a heart that had endured too much but continued beating. "What happened to her?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman's eyes softened. She found that even in darkness, there are moments of light. That even the deepest wounds can heal, given time and kindness. She reached for the young woman's hand, squeezing it gently. "And so will you." Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time they did not fall from the same place of hopelessness. There was something else, an unfamiliar warmth creeping into the spaces where sorrow had settled for too long. Could it be that she was not as lost as she had believed? Could it be that fate had not abandoned her, but was waiting for her to see beyond her pain? The woman stood, wrapping her shawl tightly around her shoulders. "Fate has already set things in motion," she said. "You may not see it now, but soon, you will understand why you had to walk through the storm." She turned toward the door, but before stepping out, she looked back one last time. "Remember this, love has a way of finding those who least expect it. Be patient with your heart." With that, she disappeared into the night, leaving behind only the echoes of her words and the small, worn locket resting on the table. The young woman stared at it, turning it over in her hands. A part of her wanted to dismiss the encounter as nothing more than a passing conversation. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. Perhaps this was fate's way of reminding her that she was not forgotten, that her story was still being written. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe, just a little, that something beautiful might still be waiting ahead. The night had long settled, yet sleep remained distant. She sat by the table, the dim candlelight flickering against the worn surface, her fingers tracing the delicate curves of the old locket. It felt unfamiliar yet comforting in her palm, as though it carried a message meant just for her. The woman's words lingered in her mind. Love has a way of finding those who least expect it. For too long, she had believed that love had abandoned her, that pain had taken its place permanently. But something about that brief encounter had shifted the heaviness in her heart. The sorrow was still there, but now it wasn't as suffocating. A small part of her wanted to believe that healing was possible, that fate had not entirely turned away. She pressed the locket open, revealing a tiny folded piece of paper inside. Her breath caught as she carefully unfolded it, revealing faded, delicate handwriting. "Even the most broken hearts can beat again. Trust in the journey." The words were simple, yet they held a depth that resonated with the ache she had carried for so long. It was as if the woman had known exactly what she needed to hear, what her soul had been yearning for all this time. A quiet sigh escaped her lips as she leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. How long had it been since she had allowed herself to believe in something beyond her grief? She had been so consumed by loss that she had forgotten that life still moved forward, that there were still paths she had yet to walk. The following morning, the first rays of sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting a golden glow across the room. For the first time in weeks, she felt a strange sense of peace. It wasn't overwhelming, nor did it erase the sadness she carried, but it was there, a small flicker of something new. Determined to change even the smallest part of her routine, she stepped outside. The fresh air filled her lungs, a welcome contrast to the staleness of the room she had confined herself to. The world outside continued as it always had, children laughing in the distance, merchants calling out their goods, birds chirping as they welcomed the morning. It was as though life had been waiting for her to return, patient yet unwavering. As she walked along the familiar path toward the market, she found herself observing people differently. There was a woman selling flowers at the corner, her face beaming with warmth as she handed a bouquet to a young girl. An elderly man sat on a bench nearby, his wrinkled hand stroking the head of a stray cat curled up beside him. Everywhere she looked, there were moments of connection, small, fleeting, yet filled with meaning. Had these moments always been there? Had she simply been too lost in her pain to notice them? She paused near a small bakery, inhaling the sweet aroma of freshly baked bread. The shopkeeper, a kind-faced man in his 50s, caught her gaze and offered a smile. "Good morning," he greeted, his voice warm and welcoming. "You're up early today." She hesitated before responding. I thought I'd take a walk." He nodded knowingly. "That's good. Fresh air has a way of clearing the mind." He reached for a small loaf, wrapping it in paper before handing it to her. "Here. A gift. Sometimes, a bit of sweetness is all we need to start again." She blinked, surprised by the simple act of kindness. "Thank you," she murmured, her fingers tightening around the warm package. As she continued walking, something inside her shifted. The world had not changed overnight, nor had her past been erased, but there was a new awareness growing within her, a realization that life was not just sorrow. There was warmth in the simplest moments, in the kindness of strangers, in the gentle embrace of a new morning. Later that evening, she found herself back at the table, staring at the locket once more. The pain had not disappeared, but it no longer consumed her entirely. There was space now, space for healing, space for the possibility of something beyond grief. Perhaps that was the whisper of hope she had been waiting for. Not a grand gesture, not an instant transformation, but small, quiet moments that reminded her she was still alive, still capable of feeling something other than loss. The past would always be a part of her, but maybe, just maybe, the future had something waiting too. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to hope. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing sunrise, she felt something inside her shift, subtle but undeniable. The sorrow that had once weighed her down no longer held the same grip over her heart. It was still there, lingering in quiet corners of her soul, but it no longer defined her. Instead, something else had begun to take root, something she had long believed was lost. Hope. She found herself waking up with a little more purpose, stepping outside more often, and noticing the world in a way she hadn't before. The flowers that bloomed along the market road, the laughter of children playing in the streets, the warmth of the sun against her skin, these were things she had once overlooked in her grief. Now, they felt like tiny miracles, whispers from fate reminding her that life was still moving forward, waiting for her to embrace it. One afternoon, as she wandered through the marketplace, her steps brought her back to the small bakery. The same shopkeeper greeted her with his familiar warm smile. "You're looking better," he observed, handing her a fresh loaf of bread. "It's good to see you out more often." She offered a small smile in return. "I suppose I'm learning to live again." He nodded approvingly. "That's all any of us can do. Life doesn't stop for sorrow, but it does have a way of healing even the deepest wounds." She took his words to heart. Healing wasn't about forgetting, it was about learning to carry the past while still making room for the present. That evening, as she sat by her window, she turned the old locket over in her hands. The message inside had become a source of quiet strength. Even the most broken hearts can beat again. Trust in the journey. For so long, she had believed that love had abandoned her. But perhaps love had never truly left. Maybe love wasn't just the grand, sweeping emotions she had once longed for. Maybe it was in the little things, The kindness of a stranger, the warmth of fresh bread, the gentle touch of the wind as it carried whispers of new beginnings. One evening, as she walked through the quiet streets, she noticed a figure standing near the fountain in the town square. A man, lost in thought, much like she had once been. There was something familiar in the way he stared at the water, as though he, too, was carrying a burden unseen by the world. Without fully understanding why, she paused. A silent understanding passed between them, an unspoken connection between two souls who had known sorrow but were still standing. He turned, meeting her gaze. "It's peaceful here," he said, his voice gentle yet filled with a depth of emotion she recognized all too well. She nodded. "It is." A comfortable silence settled between them before he spoke again. "I used to come here often, when I felt lost." She hesitated before responding, but something about him made her feel safe enough to be honest. "I know that feeling." For the first time in a long while, she wasn't just reflecting on her own pain, she was seeing someone else's. And in that moment, she realized something profound. Love wasn't just about what she had lost. It was about what she still had to give. Perhaps fate had not taken love from her. Perhaps it had been waiting for her to find it in a different way, through different eyes, in different moments. As the stars began to appear in the night sky, she felt something unfamiliar settle in her heart. It was not just hope. It was the quiet, steady return of love. Not the kind that sweeps in with grand declarations, but the kind that whispers, that lingers in small acts of kindness, that finds its way back into the hearts of those who least expect it. And just like that, she understood. Her tears had once fallen in sorrow, but fate had dried them with love.